there's been a lot of improvements to languages and frameworks over the years. And I really think that is where the industry is getting some of the biggest security lift, is just making it really easy for people to do the right thing and making it harder to do the wrong thing. The most important thing that we think about when creating and delivering training is making the training relevant. If you're asking for developers' time, you should be using their time wisely.
Hi, I'm Guy Pojarny, CEO and co-founder of Sneak, and you're listening to The Secure Developer, a podcast about security for developers, covering security tools and practices you can and should adopt into your development workflow. It is a part of the Secure Developer community. Check out thesecuredeveloper.com for great talks and content about developer security and to ask questions and share your knowledge. The Secure Developer is brought to you by HeavyBit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Secure Developer. Today, I have a security team here from Segment, which I'm really excited to talk to and hear about developer-focused security practices at Segment. Around, I have Leif Dreizler and Ellett. Thanks for coming on the show, Leif and Eric.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So before I dig into a variety of topics over here, can I ask you to just give the listeners a little bit of a background about how is it that you rolled and found yourself into security and into this role?
Sure. So it all started for me studying computer science in college, and I started working at a security consulting company while I was still in school and worked there for a couple of years after graduating as well. And then from there, I actually was a sales engineer at BugCrowd for a couple of years. And then after leaving BugCrowd, I joined Segment on their application security team about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, for me, I was a software developer as a contractor doing DARPA projects over in DC. And then I followed my dreams to try to start a SDN security company here in the Bay Area, which was way too early. And so I ended up going to Credit Karma as an application security engineer. And then ended up coming over to Segment after Leif stole me from Credit Karma. Wanted me to work with him over here.
Very cool. So I guess you both came into AppSec, I guess, a couple of companies ago, or sort of, 2-3 companies ago. Although specifically AppSec role, it sounds like, Leif, at least for you, and is like it was from an SE, from a sales engineer dealing with security, more in sort of the bug bounty side, to now switching to AppSec itself.
Yeah, so I would definitely put BugCrowd in the application security space. And then most of the security consulting I was doing was application security assessment. So I was doing third-party pen testing. So I've been in some portion of the AppSec space since the beginning of my career.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's like you actually hear about a lot of people that move from the dark side, if you will, or from more the red team, the sort of the pen testing side into the defender side. It's a version of that, because you have a solution that sort of helps people do that type of pen testing, even if, it's not a classic pen test, it's sort of a BugCrowd platform. But fundamentally, you go from being the attacker to being the defender still.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about Segment Security. Where do you sit in the org? What's the team structure? How does it work?
Yeah, Segment Security as a whole is led by our CISO, Colleen Coolidge. So we have several sub-teams underneath that. So we have our GRC team. We have our corporate security team, which is focusing on security outside of production, right, in AWS and GCP. And then we have CERT. So when, inevitably security incidents happen, how do we handle them with grace? And then we have application security, product security, and cloud security. And that's actually under an umbrella of security engineering, which is the team I lead. Leif's technically on application security, but my team is pretty much very flexible in the sense that, we kind of work on the problems that make the most sense at a given time. And so it's not unreasonable for an application security engineer specifically to work on cloud security projects or product security, given the demand in a given domain.
So it's a security engineering group. That's sort of the title of it. And is that title more sort of inspired, if you will, by the people inside of it, or that it's working with engineers?
Yeah, I think we just put a title on there just because we didn't want to silo the teams too much. I think it's a little too early for us to do that. Granted, we have 5 people on our team. And so having hyper specialization per team is just it's just too early. And we also believe pretty heavily that to be good at application security or cloud security, it requires kind of a foundational understanding in the other domains. And so, it's great to just be under security engineering umbrella. And again, like I was mentioning earlier, being able to, transition and put engineers where it makes the most sense given, the problems that we're facing at any given time or quarter.
Got it.
I think part of it also is to capture the idea that we do expect the people on our team to be software engineers at a certain level. And so software engineering and security engineering aren't that different. Obviously, there's specializations, but we're still writing code. We're still deploying stuff. We're still working directly with software engineers. And I think the security engineering title does a good job both encapsulating that work as well as Eric said, kind of creating an umbrella for product security, cloud security, and application security all under one org group.
Cool. And does the security engineering group also own and operate these tools, basically like an engineering group inside, like internal tools or the platform storage? How does that work?
It really depends on the type of tooling, right? Like we're trying to figure out, for example, right now, like where do things such as like the WAF live? Yes, like it makes sense for us to be there for like the tuning and like to put the rules in to ensure that like we're actually being effective there. But like the operational side, I think our SRE team would feel more comfortable owning that. So it just really depends like per tool where like things would fall ultimately based off of like who's the best person to handle a given aspect of a given tool. So operationally for the WAF, it's definitely SRE, whereas maybe the tuning and ensuring that like, the rules actually make sense is more on the AppSec side.
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess these are the tricky questions, right? And those elements you work.
Yeah.
It's between sort of the expert center and the people maybe dealing with operating tools day to day.
Those types of things that always vary. And I think just having those candid conversations with the other directors or the other engineering leaders in the org to figure out like who is best suited to manage, that different aspect of the tool is always typically what we do.
Yeah, sounds right. So that's actually like a good tee up indeed on, like how does your group, be it security engineering and maybe specifically application security, work with the engineering team? It sounds like it's not a part of the same org. What's the kind of high level ratio, would you say, that you have of, security engineers to engineers on the regular R&D side?
I think it's roughly about 5 of us to around 100 engineers. And then security as a whole, which also includes IT, is about 15.
Okay, that's actually a pretty good ratio. I mean, as compared to a lot of companies we talk to, that's sort of a high level of investment for those components. And how is the affiliation? Is it still like one team, application security, you work with the entirety of the engineering organization, or is there some lower level partnering, right, of working with this group or the other of the engineering org?
Similar to what Eric said earlier, it really just depends quarter to quarter, like what the most high priority projects are for both engineering as well as security. And we get called in to consult on pretty much every project, but we may not have a super hands-on part of it. And then other projects, it may be a formal partnership where we're both contributing equal amounts of work. So an example of that is we added MFA for our customers last quarter. I did almost all of the back-end work, and then an engineer, Kat, from our enterprise core team, she did most of the front-end work. And so that was kind of a shared responsibility delivering that feature. So that would be a very high-level involvement from us, but it really varies project to project, quarter to quarter.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you kind of choose a specific initiative, and then you figure out how is the collaboration going to work, and is that mapped into sprints? Like, I guess it comes back to like software development chunks of work?
Yeah, we don't do sprints like holistically as an organization. Each team kind of does their own thing. We do have quarterly OKRs. So before the quarter starts, typically what happens, like I'll reach out to all of the engineering leads and give our spiel of like, hey, if you have these types of projects, let me know. If you think it's going to be security heavy, maybe we should do like what we call a partnership, which is like about 80% FTE time from my engineer to help implement or just provide support where possible for the duration of the project. We have like more of the consultation style partnerships, which, are typical in most organizations, where we'll do like a design review, a threat model, and follow up from that threat model, and maybe a pen test down the road if necessary. So that's typically how we break it down quarter to quarter. And we actually do another thing, which is we do an embed program. So one of the things that Leif talks about definitely in his AppSec California talk, which is we want to get our engineers working with other teams, like at least for a quarter. We've been experimenting when this should happen in a given security engineer's lifetime at Segment. So like we've basically decided, hey, with one of our recent CloudSec engineers, within the first month, he was actually sitting with our tooling team for a quarter and just doing tooling work and understanding how that tooling team operates, understanding actually how security processes impact the tooling team. And the goal of that quarter is for them to like work on a capstone project together to ship something that will hopefully benefit both tooling and ideally security. And then other engineers like Leif with the MFA, that was part of an embed as well. So the enterprise core team, we reached out to them ahead of time and said, hey, we really want to get MFA in the app. We know that you've been responsible for kind of the other parts of auth historically. Let's do an embed and have Leif come sit with your team for a quarter and work with you and ideally a resource on your end to build this out. And, again, it really helps what I think we coined the term like walk a mile in the developer's code.
Yeah.
To really understand what the development process is like, what our processes or our controls look like from the other side, and then really bring that back to the team to figure out how we can improve those processes and get a better understanding and empathy for the developer.
Yeah, it also really helps just understand whatever you're trying to protect. And so if there's ever a question by somebody else on our team or cert or somewhere else within engineering, and they have questions about what is our authentication flow, I can walk anybody through that whole process because I made so many changes and modifications as we were rewriting an older service as well as adding MFA at the same time. And so having that knowledge within the security team and not having to rely on an external team to answer questions about something that's as important as authentication, I think is really, really valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy kind of affiliations to changes that have happened in the DevOps world. And it feels like this was very much a part of it, about the walk a mile in the other team's shoes. But it sounds like it also goes hand in hand with your commentary at the beginning around the team being engineers, because you can only do this if the team is indeed capable of acting as an engineer inside that engineering team. If you bring somebody that doesn't have that sort of sense for what code is, and sort of how do you do that software development process, then I guess you're not as able to do it. Do you do a little bit of the other way around? Like, have you considered taking an embed from the development team and having them walk a mile in the security engineer's shoes?
You're blowing our cover here because one of the things we wanted to do was get people comfortable with the security embed, then kind of flip the script, which is like, hey, how about you come on the security team and again, exactly what you said, walk a mile in our shoes and maybe get some empathy from a security perspective and understand what we have to deal with on a cross-functional basis. And also just like, given that they are developer powerhouses, they can probably build, some really fancy and pretty tools for us in the meantime as well. So,
and I think a lot of this is, I know a lot of people hate the term DevSecOps, and that's okay. You can hate the term, but I think that this is kind of what the goal of DevSecOps should be, is similar to DevOps, where you have operations people learning how to code, and now everything at Segment is infrastructure as code, and you have developers that are running their own services built on top of the building blocks provided to them by the foundational teams at Segment. I think it's just about becoming a more well-rounded engineer, and whether you're a foundation person or a developer or a security person, you need to know at least a little bit about all of those other aspects, because it's just part of delivering quality software in 2019. Is you need to know enough about the whole stack of your application, and part of that is knowing how to keep it secure.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think it's similar to how like developers have just adopted reliability in general, right?
Yeah.
How do we get them to adopt security as part of how they adopted reliability over the past few years with the services that they've been deploying?
So let's get philosophical here a little bit and sort of say, okay, so like we talked about the org and about embed and about sort of exchanging people and getting exposure, maybe a bit about the skill set. How do you operate, not from an embed or from a security capabilities built into the product, but these security controls around? What are some of the sort of the principles or the guiding lines that you use when you go to consider a new security control, a new security program, and try to get developers to be engaged with it?
I think the first thing is, would this tool actually be used by the developer? I mean, I think answering that question as quickly as possible is the quickest way to de-risk any control or any vendor that you're going to use. If it's something that has, an awful UI or awful just usable or awful from a usability perspective, developers aren't going to use that. And ideally, like you always want to see if they have an API where you can maybe build or extend the tooling. And so I think really the first thing is just get the developers part of that eval process for any vendor that you're looking at or any control that you're going to implement, because they're ultimately going to be your users at the end of the day. And so just like product, we don't develop product without having user input. We shouldn't be developing security features without our users who are, the developers' input during that process.
That makes tons of sense for me. You bring them in, and I love the customer centricity. In this case, the customer being your developers. I know, Leif, I heard you refer to this notion or like make some quote around making it easy. Make it easy for someone to write secure code, and you'll get secure code. How does that manifest, in the day to day?
Yeah, so I think that there's been a lot of improvements to languages and frameworks over the years. And I really think that is where the industry is getting some of the biggest security lift, is just making it really easy for people to do the right thing and making it harder to do the wrong thing than doing the right thing. And I think that isn't a notion that's unique to developers by any standpoint. That's just like humans in general, is like just make it as easy as possible for people to do what the right thing is. And so I think a really great example of this is in React, it's really, really hard to introduce cross-site scripting. In our security training that we give developers, if there's somebody who's working on the front end, if there's one thing that they remember, it's don't use dangerously set inner HTML. And our security org, we very rarely say never do something. Dangerously set inner HTML is one of those things. And even before any of us got here from the security team, just because our developers had made the choice to use React because it was easy to use and cool, and Facebook built it, and a bunch of other more valid reasons from a development standpoint, we've only had a few instances of cross-site scripting. I think it's like less than 5 in our app, like ever.
Yeah.
And compare that to somewhere else that isn't using React and is having to remember to escape user input every single place in the app. It's like that is so much harder than just using React and not using dangerously set inner HTML. And so I think that's a really good example of an instance where it's just been very easy to write good code.
Yeah, and I guess we're all humans, eh? We're lazy. At the end of the day, the path of least resistance is the one that's going to prevail. So might as well make that the secure path.
Yeah, we also kind of adopt that ourselves. I mean, at least the dangerously set inner HTML, I love the fact that like dangerous is in the name. Like we use Terraform for most of our infrastructure here at Segment, including like S3 buckets, and like our public bucket module is like dangerously public S3 bucket. Right? And so like people, when they're using that, they're like, okay, maybe I should think about this a little bit more. And we try to adopt that where possible, just because I think it does definitely send a signal as well.
Yeah, it definitely makes somebody think twice about like, is this actually what I want to do? Yeah. And sometimes it is. Like sometimes it does make sense to have a bucket be public and we have, just static assets or something like that that's just getting loaded on our public web page. But anybody who even remotely follows InfoSec news knows that many times the bucket should not have been public. So
yeah. I think any signal that you can send to like a developer who's probably done like the 15th code review that day, or looking at something and they see something like dangerous, they're like, oh, maybe this is something I should actually pay attention to a little bit more versus, hey, this is just an S3 resource that, they're using.
It also makes it a lot easier for a developer who's more junior. And, we don't expect every developer to be a security expert. We expect them to try, and we expect them to ask more senior people on their team or people from our team for help. But having flags like this, like even somebody might be their first software engineering job, they can see that something says dangerous. And I think that'll even trigger something for a brand new dev, like, hey, maybe I don't want to be using something dangerous.
Yeah, indeed. So switching kind of, maybe into education, when we talk about sort of making security experts out of these developers, and, at the end of the day, there's only so much, we can become experts in. Developers are heavily overwhelmed today with information. I know you've invested a fair bit in training and educating those developers on the important parts of security. Tell us a bit about this. How do you go about building some of these security perspectives in your dev teams?
Sure. So the most important thing that we think about when creating and delivering training is making the training relevant. And so if you're asking for developers' time, you should be using their time wisely. And so when developers start at Segment, they go through a 2-part training. The first part is thinking like an attacker, and the second part is secure code review. And in the thinking like an attacker training, all of the examples that we talk about are things that we've had submitted to our bug bounty program, or things that we've gotten in pen test reports, or things that we've found internally. And so every single example that we show them is something that was a vulnerability that was previously in Segment.
Oh,
and it's a lot easier to get a developer to care about a vulnerability when you can say, hey, this feature that you're probably familiar with, this was a previous vulnerability, this was the impact, this is what the fix looked like, versus talking about a cross-site request forgery example from a bank where you're transferring money and the developer might think like, I don't work at a bank, like, why do I care about this?
Yeah.
It just makes it a lot more tangible if you actually just have all of your examples come from stuff that is similar to where they're working. And then the follow-up to that is we teach them how to use Burp Suite with the OWASP Juice Shop project, which is our favorite vulnerable web app because it's written in Node and Angular, and it's a single page app. And, the tech stack isn't exactly the same as Segment, but it's pretty close. It's definitely close enough that when we show them the architecture diagram, developers understand like, hey, this is like pretty close to what Segment looks like. And then part 2, the secure code review training, one of our coworkers, David, he built a couple small, intentionally vulnerable blocks of code that actually run and create a Hawaiian shirt store. And then we asked the developers to review the code and identify vulnerabilities based off of the training that we've given them that day. And again, all of that is React, Node, or Go, which is what we use to build Segment. And so whether they're a backend engineer or front engineer, there should be some part of that code review that is in a language that they're familiar with based off their time at Segment.
So in the thinking like an attacker training, we also want it to be competitive in a sense. So like after we go through the theory and examples of each type of vulnerability, then we get them smart with Burp Suite and hitting Juice Shop, we actually have them go after the specific vulnerabilities that we went over. And on the whiteboard, we have those vulnerabilities, like at least the names of them enumerated, and we kind of treat them as flags. And when people capture them, like the person that's giving the training, like they'll have to show it to them and we'll write their name up on the board. And it really gets people in like a competitive mode. Like we've had people stay after the training was over, like a half hour or like 45 minutes still trying to exploit, the last flag because they were just so engaged in the training. And, that's definitely a huge positive signal on our end that people are really taking something away from it.
Yeah, it's also just a great way to meet new developers. So we try and give this training within somebody's first month or so of them getting to Segment. And for a lot of these developers, this might be their first interaction with us as a security team. It might be their first interaction with a security team ever. Maybe this is their first job, or maybe their previous company didn't have a security team. And so we think it's really important that they have a positive experience with us from day one, because a lot of how we're effective as a security team is relying on developers letting us know when they need help. And so they're the ones that are letting us know that, hey, I need a design review, or, hey, maybe I've identified something and I'm not sure if this is a vulnerability or not, but I just wanted to let somebody know. None of that stuff works, and you can't rely on that if you don't have the kind of relationship where developers are encouraged to come and talk to the security team.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Like, I absolutely love the idea of using code that you relate to, and like the fact that that's vulnerabilities, historical vulnerabilities, is sort of especially resourceful here and innovative. Probably kind of required a good chunk of effort, right? Because you have to sort of sift through those and explain them as well in a way that is manageable. But I guess on the flip side, you get something that is much more attached, much more relatable to their surrounding. And I also love how it's all coming together around, I think a lot of the overlaying theme here is around good interaction, good, healthy people interaction, whether it's the embed, whether it's the skill set, whether it's, that good initial relationship with them, very much about positive security. And unfortunately, not yet super prevalent in our industry of security.
I do think that is changing. I think that historically that probably hasn't been super common, but I think there's kind of a new wave of security teams that understand like this is really the only way to get stuff done, especially in an instance where you're at a company with a microservices architecture and every developer is pushing code tens of times per day. Is like you can't review every single pull request. Like we're not pair programming with every single developer. We just have to give them the training and resources and teach them security judgment, which is a term that I stole from a Netflix presentation a couple of years ago at AppSec California that I just absolutely love. And it's just the idea that, even if you're not a security expert, you should at least know when something looks off, or maybe something doesn't seem like the right way to be doing whatever you're trying to accomplish, and just let us know, and we're always available to come and help out.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm fortunate enough to run this podcast and have see some like yourselves, people that are at the forefront here and talk about it. I very much hope that this is a trend, versus an echo chamber. But I think over time it's a must, as you point out, right? Software is accelerating too much and getting too complex for anybody from outside to secure it. I guess on that note, we talked about education, we talked about engagement with the team. When you talk about this notion of positive, I know you've done some things to celebrate successes. Can you give us a couple of examples of when somebody does a good thing around security? How do they have some stickers? I remember some mention of a crown.
Yeah, the stickers actually come out as part of our training. So when you complete the training, we have like this Hackerman sticker that is like this online meme that we use quite a bit in the training itself, so that people can kind of show like, hey, I did the training. Another thing that we've started, and I'm actually presenting at OWASP next month at Uber, I think, which is the leaderboard. So like it's effectively this gamification platform that we built that celebrates those small wins that people have. So like when people come to you and say, hey, I think I noticed this issue, or I noticed maybe some PII in this log, how do we recognize those small wins, right? And so this leaderboard is basically this UI. I really got enticed by Halo 2 and kind of the notion of like a matchmaking back when I was in, I think, high school or middle school, and like how people can be, ranked. And so basically what happens is when you do these small things, we'll recognize you and you like gain experience points. So everyone starts off at level 1, and you'll get like, depending on the type of thing that they've done, you'll get like 15 experience points or 25 experience points. And when you get 100, you go to level 2, and it posts like all the great things that people do every Friday in our security Slack channel, so that, people, not just the people that were part of that interaction, like the security team and the developer, but, even like the VP or the CTO or people that are like higher up can say, hey, this individual has, done all of these great things this past week or like this past month. You'll just see like that recognition happening in the security channel overall.
That's awesome. What types of actions do they get points for?
So like we have vulnerability management program here, like most people, and we rate our vulnerabilities. So like if you find a P1, we'll give you 100 points, right? Like if you go out and actually find these things, it's like 100. So that like P1 is like the worst type of vulnerability. If you fix it, we give you 50, because fixing could have been because we assigned you a vulnerability to fix. But like people that are out there proactively finding these things, like we give you 100, and that's like automatic level up. Or, if they just, we have like kind of a catch-all, like went above and beyond for security. So if they ask someone to badge in, this isn't even just for engineers. Like our salespeople are on this board, and that's typically because they've asked someone to badge in that was maybe trying to tailgate. And another thing that we've done with this is also open it up to other people. So like this is not just security giving these points. Like we're not always around to watch people tailgate. So we've had other people that are not security engineers or on the security team, submit these points through the Slack command that we have. And so, we were just really trying to build a culture of people recognizing each other for, doing awesome security things.
That's awesome. I still think stickers are good as well, even if they're just from the training. I think you also showcase that it's important, but I very much love the leaderboard and those results. Before we're sort of getting to the tail end of the podcast, can you just kind of rattle off a little bit of some of the tools of choice that you have today in your stack for people to consider?
Sure. So as listeners of the podcast might guess, we are Snyk customers. And I think the way that we introduce Snyk does kind of do a good job of encapsulating a bunch of the stuff that we've talked about. And so when we were evaluating Snyk, as Eric said earlier, any tool that we buy, we want developers to be able to use because we want them to be able to take control of the security of their services. And so when we were doing our evaluation of Snyk, we partnered up with our growth team to integrate it with some of their repositories and get feedback on the tool, accuracy, usability, et cetera. And once they said, hey, this looks pretty good, we added it to a couple other repositories. And then as part of our introduction to the rest of the engineering team, we actually at all hands had engineers write down on a piece of paper how many total JavaScript libraries they thought we might be including across all of our repositories. And the person that was the closest, we actually gave them a crown at our engineering all hands. So yeah, Snyk is definitely one of the tools that we rely on. That's how we introduced it. We also use Detectify for our DAS scanning. I think the DAS scanning market it can be challenging to find a tool that actually can log into a single page like React application where the DOM's just doing
crazy things.
Yeah, for SaaS, we're actually looking at SEML right now. We have been using, so Coinbase created this awesome tool or concept, which is called Salus, which is a way to deploy a container to each CI. Like if you're using Circle, you can create a new job that will spin up a separate container that would be like the Salus container. And from there, you can, from a central location, inject various different linters or other tools that you want to run that will do some static analysis. But now we're looking at something like SEML as well to help supplement. And they also have a pretty good developer story. I think I love the fact that they have a query language for their SaaS product and people that aren't just security folk can go and use it to find other types of problems that aren't just security related. So we're looking at them.
As I alluded to earlier, we use BugCrowd for our bug bounty program. Mm-hmm. That's kind of a combination of tools and services, but I think running a bug bounty program is pretty important just to show researchers hey, if you do find something, we're not going to sue you, we're going to pay you. So, please be responsible and tell us about anything that you might find. We're looking at Asset Note. That's another tool that we're evaluating. They're in the asset discovery space. So something that will go out and look for internet-facing assets and try a variety of tools and techniques from the bug bounty world. So some of the co-founders of Asset Note were really successful bug bounty hunters. So it'll scan your external resources and see, okay, hey, can we do subdomain takeovers or things like that? So that's a tool that we're pretty excited to use in the future.
Very cool. Well, thanks for sharing. I mean, I think that's very useful to sort of hear the vetted set of tools around. So I guess before I let you go here, I like to ask all of my guests one last question, which is if you have one pet peeve or key advice that you would like to give a team that is looking to level up their security caliber, what would that be?
I don't really know if it's a pet peeve, and I think it should be relatively obvious from the rest of the podcast, but be friends with people. People are way more likely to do the things that you need them to do if they like you. And so much of security revolves around getting other teams to do work because they have domain expertise that you don't, and you need their help to improve the security posture of your company. And so do everything you can to build really great relationships inside of your organization.
Yeah, I think the one thing is definitely try to do the investment in building out quality where you have the most face time. So with your engineers, so training, for example, it's paid us back in spades, I think, the amount of value we've gotten out of it. Yes, we could have gone down the automated route or a video route, but the amount of time that we have spent making that training awesome has definitely outweighed the amount of time we would have had spent dealing with the vulnerabilities or issues that would have came up if we didn't spend that time. So
cool. This is also a good time to mention that if you want to join this very forward-looking team here, you can check out some of the job openings that this Segment team has on segment.com/jobs, especially in the San Francisco area, but it seems like across the US as well. So thanks a lot, Leif and Eric, for coming on the show. This was excellent.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And thanks for everybody tuning in to the show, and hope you join us for the next one. That's all we have time for today. If you'd like to come on as a guest on this show or get involved in this community, find us at thesecuredeveloper.com or on Twitter at thesecuredev. Visit heavybit.com to find additional episodes, full transcriptions, and other great podcasts. See you next time.